Action.
Hi guys. So I apologize. The last video you were watching, we got cut off. So I'm going to finish it up. This is going to be probably about 5 minutes that was left in this video. So when the last video ended, I was just talking about the fact that I was just summarizing that when we impact the acetabular prosthesis into the pelvis, most of the fixation we feel comes from the rim. And the stretch that occurs that produces the compressive grasp of bone based on Hooke's law, and that's sort of the initial grasp of bone. And as you keep inserting this cup in, the resistance to insertion starts to include the dome, where basically you're compressing the dome, and you start to add the force normal from here, and the overall resistive forces go up, because you're not only just fighting the tensile stresses of the rim, you're also now fighting the compressive forces of the dome. And what we just finished saying is that the obsession in fully seating this thing here and getting the dome to sit may compromise your rim fixation, which is the most important part of your press fit fixation. And we just had described the fact that surgeons, for that extra millimeter, will take this off, ream line to line, completely give up on press fit fixation and use screws. And that's what we're trying to avoid. So the similar problem occurs with the femur. And basically when we apply the femoral stem into the femur, this is again a ring and spring-like structure where you're stretching this bone. And based on the stretch that's applied to it in Hooke's law, it produces a corresponding compressive force that grasps the stem. The difference between here, the femoral stem and the femur, and the acetabulum and the pelvis, is that you have a dome and a retaining wall here, and you do not have a dome and a retaining wall here. So if you keep applying force, you just push this thing straight through. And I think that's why, if you look over here, basically I've drawn this picture. It's a similar spring-like structure of the bone that is grasping the prosthesis. However, here there's no dome, there's no retaining wall, and we anticipate that if you graph applied force versus insertion for femoral stem to proximal femur, it won't look like what it looked like for our acetabulum, where for the last final millimeter, you had to add an extra 4,000 newtons of force. For this, there is no retaining wall, so you will increase force. You use the sort of the stretch properties of the femur, and then if you push beyond the sort of the plastic phase of the proximal femur, you don't have a dome, and basically the forces go down. Insertion keeps continuing. And we suspect that the applied force versus pull-out force would look something like this. So the issue here is, how can we, without having to use our senses, which is very non-standard, understand or get a value that tells us that we have stretched this bone just the right amount to give us the right amount of compressive grasp, and we've stretched it to this maximum amount before fracturing it. That's what I call best fixation short of fracture. It's a value, and I think based on the concept we talked about, we can actually achieve best fixation short of fracture. Basically, we can kind of optimize or find out where the maximum stretch to the proximal femur is. We can find out where the maximum stretch to the rim of the acetabulum is. And I think this is sort of the basic concept. I would like to point out that the paper I sent you about the meta-analysis of the anterior femur approach, hip replacement through the anterior approach, where there's navigation used, the notation was that these prostheses are loosening on the femoral side at an alarming rate, and we have contemplated that with acetabulum, there's a tendency for the surgeon to the applied force, to do too much applied force and end up in this sort of C range where you're basically pushing against the dome or that retaining wall. And with the femur, there's a tendency to be in the A range where you're not producing enough stretch and you're not producing enough compressive grasp. And what's happening is that you're in the A range, you poor seating, poor fixation, and poor pull-out, and you end up in loosening and subsiding. So we have sort of a different problem on the femoral side and a different problem on the acetabular side, but the concept is the same, is that can we standardize the assessment of quality of fixation, where if you put 1,000 surgeons together and you give them a tool, they can, with that tool, assess the best or the optimal amount of stretch on bone that gives the optimal amount of compression and grasp on the prosthesis. And we've basically taken it to the level where we may have reached the ultimate strength of the spring-like behavior of bone, and we have not taken it to failure and fracture. Thank you very much.